Tell me about the lineage in which you play the drums ritually.
I'm initiated in Santeria, also known as Lukumi. I never call it Santeria. It's Afro-Cuban, and it's brought over from obviously the slave trade in the 1800s, from modern day Nigeria to Cuba, and so there's in Nigeria there's several priesthoods, and in Cuba they got kind of like mushed together into like initiations. Mm-hmm. I'm initiated as a priest, generally speaking. It's called an Olarisha. But separately, I'm also initiated to the drums. So I would call myself an Omanya. Mm-hmm. And so all these traditions are have an apostolic line of succession. So it's the person who initiates you has to have been initiated by somebody else, and so on and so forth. And then there's like different, they call them ramas, which are like paths or families, I guess. Mm-hmm. Family is a better word. So I was initiated by a fairly well-known Afro-Cuban drummer. His name is Orlando Rios, or they called him Puntilla, which means little point. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to be initiated to the drum. You don't have to be a priest otherwise to be initiated to the drums. They're actually kind of two separate things. I know many people who have just gotten started in the religion but know how to drum really well, mm-hmm. and know the music, and they go right to that.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about what the ceremonial situation is like where you're playing.
Okay, so there's the most common are going to be, they call them anyas. I mean, it's the same. Anya is actually an orisha, or a deity. Mm-hmm. And they called the drums. Well, okay, so the drums that we use have to be consecrated. They are visually, they're called bata drums. Mm-hmm. They look like hourglass shaped drums that you hold horizontally. Mm-hmm. And there's 3 different sizes: small, medium, large. The consecrated ones have special things inside of them, which I cannot discuss. Cool. Okay. And we use them for really formal ceremonies that are also called anyas. Mm-hmm. The purpose of them really is to give what's the word I want to use? Give to honor a particular orisha or deity. And I can get into more of like what that mechanism is in this case, but so usually like people are either told that they need to do a drumming for a particular orisha, and then or they just want to. Mm-hmm. And those are the cases where possessions happen or can happen. That's not really the goal, by the way. It's that's what you see in Hollywood. I mean, you could have a perfectly successful drumming with no possessions whatsoever. Mm-hmm. The possessions are sort of like an extra treat. Mm-hmm. And that's the main use of them. There really aren't that many, comparatively speaking, consecrated drums as you might think. Mm. Like here in the Northwest, until recently, there was only one set. Mm. And now that set has gone to Miami. Mm-hmm. But and for a long time, when I started, there were only like, I don't know, maybe I'm going to guess and say a dozen in the entire country. Wow. So they're very, it's a very drawn out process to make them consecrated, and plus you have to be, you have to be on your game. So that kind of limits things a little bit. Mm-hmm. Mm. And there are drums, like bata drums, that look like consecrated drums. Mm-hmm. That you can use in non-formal settings, and that happens like with performances, or sometimes people just want to have a drumming in their house, uh-huh. Where there aren't quite so many rules, and they'll use the non-consecrated drums for that, and they look the same, they sound the same. You treat them differently.
Do you ever do any of those sort of, I guess, pure musical performances like that?
No, not me. No, I'm not one of those people. No, there's a group here in Seattle who does. Much better than I am by a long shot. And yeah, they're like folkloric performances, basically. Yeah.
So you're saying your use of drums is sort of your own practice. You're doing something that was either given to you to do or that you're electing to do for some practice reason of yours.
So yeah, for me it was when I played drum. So in the original congregation I was part of, I always played drums, and it wasn't even just these. It was like other stuff, other drums. And I was sort of like thrust into being one of the drummers, in this context. And so really the first opportunity that I had to get initiated, actually formally initiated, I did. That was in, what year was that? 2005, I think it was, when I did that, which does not give you knowledge. That just gives you the right to touch the drums. But yeah, no, I did quite a bit early on from a profane standpoint, and then later on it other stuff happened. I don't. Yeah, so Seattle's kind of a desert when it comes to this practice. So I don't do that. I'm not really interested in performing, honestly.
Yeah. My
primary focus is, sometimes when we do these ceremonies, I do a lot of the preparation, and I kind of work with the drummers. Nowadays, that's what I do mostly, just because I don't have time to practice and do this kind of like big stuff.
So I'm thinking about the moment in ceremony when the drumming starts as like the first note.
Yeah.
Like what leads up to that point, and then what is the moment of starting to play like?
So the formal ceremonies have an order to them. We have to do ceremonies in private before the drums start. Usually the day before. And then there's like 3 parts to a drumming ceremony. This is all very formal. That's the thing. I mean, there's a particular process. It's not like a drum circle.
Yeah.
It starts out with it's confusing because they use the same words a lot. They call it an ordo. So usually when you do one of these ceremonies, you're doing it for a particular deity. So we have a whole, display set up for that deity. They call it a throne. The deity sitting there is like food. There's a big like canopy that we build, everything. And the drummers sit in front of that, facing the deity. Usually the backs are to the people. And they go through a series of drum beats that represent each of the different orishas. No singing is done at this point. And it's like a medley of drum beats. If you can think of it that way. And there's a particular order to it. So the orishas always go like in a particular order, and except for the one who we're doing a ceremony for, that one is always put to the end. And you can tell. I mean, you can tell once you get familiar with it. You can tell what the orisha they're playing for just by the beat. It's like I said, it's very carefully done. So once they do that, they take drummers take a break, and people get to pay their respects to the throne, talk, have a drink, whatever, and then the actual quote party happens, and they then do songs for each of the orisha in the same order, with singing. And there's a series of very basic songs that are called Odo Cantado that they go through. At that point, that's when the actual, like, as far as like the public goes, that's when it starts. So once that's finished, then it's a free for all. They'll play for 3 hours.
Wow.
And then there's a particular ending that you have to do. Anyway, but when it starts, I mean, it's you can feel it when they're consecrated. There are a lot of rules about who could be near the drummers. And with a notable exception, who can even touch them, the drummer or the drums. People are not supposed to walk behind the drummers because there's like a current that comes behind them, and you're not supposed to break that. You know, cosmologically speaking, the deity that's associated with the drums, her name is Anya. It's female. For that reason, the drummers are supposed to be male. It's not a male chauvinist thing. It's basically you're making creation. You have a mother and a father kind of a thing. I'm not saying there is no chauvinistic angle to it, because there definitely is. It definitely is, but that's supposed to be what the symbology is. So you have a mother and a father, and you're giving birth to something. And Anya is a class of Orisha that basically goes back to the creation of the universe. There's a few Orishas that are like that, and she's one of them. And when we do these ceremonies, you're basically, like if you think of the creation of the universe as a big bang, well, you're creating a little bang, because you're basically trying to manifest the Orisha in a way, and the drums are the language that they're speaking. So when the drums start, it's like you could tell when they're consecrated. If somebody gets possessed, you can tell if it's real. There's ways that they check. I mean, I've seen people get possessed from touching the drums by mistake. I mean, it's a pretty. It's very heavy.
So yeah. Is that kind of stuff, the like major spirit stuff, happening mostly in people who are not playing, that are dancing or what have you, or are participating in the ceremony directly? That is how it's supposed to happen.
It should. There are always exceptions, but you don't really want. I mean, really, the Orisha, and really any. I've said this 100 times. I mean, any spirit that's worth their salt knows their place, and they know when things are appropriate. And having a drummer get possessed in the middle of drumming is not appropriate. I'm talking full on possession. I mean, having like a two-way sort of a thing, or like they say two-headed in hoodoo possession. That's different. Or like the singer, especially having that two-way communicate. That's a totally different thing. But they're supposed to be conscious of what they're doing. And but the dancers, the people out front, that's a whole different ball game, because it's almost like the power of those deities are being like projected to them. So it's when you're close, it can get pretty intense, but it's hard to describe, but you can tell. It's like you could feel like electricity sometimes.
Is that sort of how you see the role of the drum in this kind of ceremony, as like a conductor of that spirit to those people, or to everyone? I mean, it's to the deity, I suppose. Like, where does the drummer fit?
It's partially conductor. It's the voice. Yeah, it's the voice of, like, Anya is communicating to the Orisha and vice versa. I mean, the drum beats have a communication of their own. Like I said, there's 3 drums. There's a small, medium, and a large. The small one is called a konkolo, and that kind of keeps that's like a metronome. And the middle one is called itotele, and that's like it is the one that probably has a conversation the most with the big drum, which is called iya. And they're usually like iya, the leader of the head drummer is going to play that one, and they like will say something through a drum beat, and itotele has to answer. So there's a call and response happening in the drums themselves. There's also a call and response happening with the music, with the singing, between the singer and the participants. So yeah, it's supposed to be it's a very holistic kind of approach to it.
It sounds like, from a purely musical perspective, the drummers are super involved. There's a lot of listening and responding happening.
Yes.
Which sort
No,
of
they have to be on it.
It gives the sense of why getting possessed in the middle of that might not be super helpful to the conducting of the ceremony.
No, I mean, you're playing just from a mathematical standpoint, most of the drum beats are playing at least 2 time signatures at the same time.
Gnarly.
So it can get gnarly. And the big drum goes back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a musical background prior to doing this?
I went to school for sound engineering, but
okay. So you've done a lot of listening to things.
I've done a lot of listening, but I played music ever since high school, and my first instrument was bass.
Okay, so yes, you did have a musical background.
And then my original teacher in Lukumi threw me into the drums. I took to it immediately. Yeah, it was you.
So you started on the bass.
Yeah.
Do you still play any string instruments?
Some guitar. I'm getting lazy.
Mm-hmm. Relatable. Do you connect these instruments that you've played to each other? Like, do you feel like your time playing the bass and the guitar that you play on the side now, like, does that inform your relationship to the drums in any way?
Only in the sense that I think in rhythm. I've always been really good at rhythm, and even when we have a drumming, and if I'm not drumming, I'm a terrible dancer, believe it or not. but yeah, it's like I don't know. I even like a lot of the things to do with your Orishas. I think of it in terms of rhythm. Prayers that we do. I mean, a lot of prayers are really songs, and even like some of the ones we do that aren't songs, I have them sort of categorized in my head according to like a certain cadence. So it's just part of what I do. You
used the word mathematically once in this conversation in a musical context, and I'm wondering what that has to do with it too. Like polyrhythms are obviously very beautiful patterns if you describe them mathematically, complex, intricate, many phases at once. And we haven't really talked at all about astrology, etc.
No.
But, do you connect this musical trance practice to the sort of geometric and mathematical workings of the universe directly in that way?
Yeah, I do. I it's unconscious though a lot of times. Like I said, I think very rhythmically. That's how I do math in my head. Is rhythmically.
Yeah. Can you unpack that a little?
I don't know. Like when I count things out in my head, I put things in pairs. Like an even odd sort of a thing in my head. And so when I'm adding things together, I have like a da 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 kind of a thing in my head.
Cool. So it sounds like a yes too.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I always kind of wondered, like with the Yorubans in Nigeria, I kind of wondered what like the pre-modern brain was like. Like, they're a very mathematical culture. I mean, the divination is their main divination system is based on 16, a count of 16, and each of the Orishas have numbers to them. Sometimes multiple numbers, but even though there's numbers, it doesn't really tell me what the brain was doing, and it makes me really wonder, like, was it math really, or was it something more intuitive? I don't know. It really makes me wonder, because they weren't doing equations necessarily or anything like that. But the drum beats, it's like a lot of them. There's exceptions, but like especially some of the feminine Orishas, they have there's like that 3 against 4 is very prominent. So it has like it's the feeling of like waves coming to the beach. That's kind of what the symbology is. Dun 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 dun, kind of a thing.